Okay, welcome. Welcome to our, welcome to our community gathering. It's been about 18 months, I think, since we've done this before at FUS. We had our first community gathering in September at Ladonia Restaurant in Minneapolis, and it was a great turnout. Everybody had a great time. But this is our first community gathering at First Unitarian Society in about 18 months or so. So it feels kind of familiar, but also kind of weird too. I mean, to be back here after all that time. Of course, for those who don't know who are visitors, by the way, welcome to all the visitors as well as our old-time members. And we were on Zoom for so many months, and actually that went very well. We had a great time on Zoom, and we were able to reach a lot more people than we normally do, because a lot of people lived in, Phoenix, Arizona, or places like that. So we were very thrilled to have a lot of people who normally would not come to our in-person community gatherings come to see us, what they were, even though they were out of town or wherever, or if they were ill and couldn't make it. So, but now we're back at FUS, and we're glad we are, because we always have a really good time. And if you're not familiar with the format here, I make a few opening remarks, make maybe a couple of announcements, and then we introduce the speaker, and then we have a Q&A after the speaker talks, and then we have like a social hour, and that's what to look forward to. And we have to be out of here by like 6 or so, but we have plenty of time to do everything we need to do. Well, a lot of folks who are not familiar with us, some of the visitors, they're probably saying, well, who are these people? They call themselves HumanistsMN. Well, we're a secular community for ethical living. We are committed to the well-being of all and the sustainability of the planet. We believe that ordinary human beings like you and me have the capacity and responsibility to create a world where all can live together in harmony. So, our motto is secular nature, ethical, and purpose. And you can check us out at our website at humanistmn.org. You can find out a lot more about us. But if you're looking for a community of like-minded folks, if you're looking for camaraderie, lifelong learning, community service, social action, we do quite a bit of that. One of our major things we support is medical aid in dying. So if you're interested in progressive legislation, service projects, this is what we're here for. This is what we do. So our dues are only $40 a year, very affordable. And I mean, we have terrific programs. Every time I talk about our programs, I'm very proud of them, because Audrey, Jerry, and a lot of other folks have a lot of programs on Meetup, and they're just terrific. The quality is terrific. We have several every month. We have about a dozen programs a month or more. But one of the things we're going to focus on this year more than in past is community service. And I want to ask one of our co-chairs, by the way, it's Marcy and Christine. I want to ask Christine to come up here and tell us about what you have in store for us this season for Humanists in Action.
Thank you, Harlan. And like he says, it is so strange and so wonderful to be with you all again. Thank you. Thank you for coming here, meeting some new people. If I can recognize you, also when you look like this. All right, I'm going to do this because that was painful. Thank you. As one of the co-chairs with my friend Marcy of Humanists in Action, we are focusing on community service. We want to do good in our community, and it is community projects the sorts of things you might recognize, and also impact on legislative and regulatory actions. We also want to focus on that. Some of the themes that are important to humanists and our organization: taking care of the environment and the concerns about the climate change, also about criminal justice reform, women's rights, and as Harlan mentioned, medical aid in dying. We all want to be able to have that choice that is right for us when it comes to the end of our life. So those are some of the causes and some of the actions we've been doing lately. There was a women's march a couple of weeks ago, and thank you to those who did come, because women's rights are human rights and reproductive care is health care. and we're 50% of the population. Regarding the environment, we were this morning, some of us did a quick change in the phone booth and cleaned up after a highway cleanup. The grand prizes were a $5 cash prize to Jerry, who found that, and John was fortunate enough to find a nice Leatherman tool. He might even be carrying it still, so you might get a free perk if you come out and pick up trash. There is also scheduled another outdoor exercise while we still have decent weather, helping clean up around the Mississippi. I think they've accumulated brush piles, and it's a matter of moving them where they need to go. So we want to take care of our beautiful, beautiful neighborhood river that's so important. Let's see what else we have planned. This fall, we are also working on the Free Bikes for Kids project. They collect up bikes through a line of clinics, and then volunteers, like some of you handy humanists, help clean them up, tune them up. I know some of you are signed up and have participated, so thank you for that. To get some kids on bikes, that is such an addition to their life. And this fall, we want to also continue to partner with Bridging for Youth, a organization that helps youth with unstable housing. And in a range of ways, we've done a drives for them, donation drive, usually around the holiday time, the end of the year. So we will look to do that. Other things being planned, this is hard times for volunteer activities because people are being careful around COVID. We've done other things like creating dinners at a homeless shelter and want to do that again, but some of this we cannot yet do. So also, if you have any ideas in the millions of emails you get in your in-bin like I do, if you see opportunities, please reach out to one of us to let us know if there's something that seems like a good fit that, we get some humanists together to work on, because that's what I want our name to be. This is why I wore this shirt when I went to the co-op after doing the highway pickup. I want people to know this is what humanism looks like. This is what we do. So let's help spread that word, spread the good news. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. I neglected to mention a couple of things. One of the things that I always forget to do is introduce myself. I'm Harlan Garbell. I just assume everybody knows me, but that's completely ridiculous. I'm Harlan Garbell, and I'm the president of the organization. And the second thing I want to mention is we are live streaming this. There are several people, dozens of people, I believe, who are watching this via YouTube. And I want to give a shout out to John Walker, one of our technology gurus who made that happen. Okay. And I just talk about membership. Our membership dues are $40 a year for an individual, basic individual membership, and our household memberships are $60. Those are terrific values, and we really could use your help. We're an all-volunteer organization. We try to self-finance everything we do, and we've been very fortunate. But we need members, and we not only need members, although we have over 230 members, dues-paying members, but we also want the members who are in the organization to step up and become part of one of our committees. We have Humanists in Action, which is a committee. We have a marketing team. We have a membership team. So there's plenty of things to do. And if you're interested in that, just talk to me or Christine or anyone else you see that's a member of the board. I think they should have on their name tag, member of the board. One other thing before we introduce our speaker. Where's Audrey? I want her to talk about upcoming programs.
Well, I wasn't prepared for that. Upcoming programs. We have a regular mindful living session that goes on. We have a secular grief group. We have Jerry's programming on, we have 2 book clubs, one led by Sophie Lee, the other by Jerry Smith. Jerry, raise your hand. Where are you, Jerry? Oh, Jerry's back there. I'm blanking. I didn't write out a list. Oh, and next month for our November program, we have Mickey Morissette, who is the publisher of the Minnesota Women's Press, who will be speaking about a lot of the connections she's made in the community of women who are movers and shakers. And I really welcome you guys to come back in November right here for that program. I do want to give a shout out. I know Christine had, because I think forgot, is Nathan. Nathan, raise your hand, give a wave. I don't know, I maybe missed it, maybe you made that, but Nathan has been leading our efforts at the food group, food packing, for years and years. And I recruited him back then, and I am so grateful for Nathan to keep that program going. So and for all of you who volunteer, but as Harlan says, we're all a volunteer organization, and you know, if you have a passion, you have an interest, you have some time, step up and help keep some of our programming going so people know we're here. I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
Our speaker today is James Croft, as you all know, because he was on our meetup notice. And I listened during the 2020. There was a Zoom conference, and James spoke. I was really taken with him. I thought he did extremely well as far as talking about organizations like ours that tend to be sort of like a little older than the normal organization, and with the type of program we need to do to get younger people into the organization. But our first person to contact James regarding his speaking today is Molly. There we go. I was looking for you. Molly. Molly's going to introduce James. She's our first point of contact with James. And thank you so much for your work in getting him here. And thanks for Marcy for driving him.
Thanks, Harlan. James Croft is the Outreach Director of the Ethical Society of St. Louis, one of the largest humanist congregations in the world. He represents the ethical society and humanism in the St. Louis community and beyond, speaking on panels, giving workshops, and taking to the streets in defense of humanist values. James holds an MA from the University of Cambridge and a Doctor of Education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where he studied human development. He is an in-demand public speaker, an engaging teacher, and a passionate activist for human rights. James was raised on Shakespeare, Sagan, and Star Trek, and is a proud gay humanist. Greg Epstein, the humanist chaplain at Harvard and MIT, described James as one of the most important young thinkers in the humanist movement today, and an incredibly eloquent and entertaining speaker. He is available to speak on humanism and social justice, building the humanist movement, the need for humanist symbols and narratives, and other topics. He also offers trainings and workshops, drawing from the many years of his experience as a teacher in high school, college, and postgraduate settings. James' topic today is the evolution of religion, what comes next. Religion has always been a common thread connecting human beings across the world and between generations. Today, that picture is changing. In the United States, none is the fastest growing religion. What will arise to replace the role of traditional religion, and what role can humanists play? Now I'm excited to turn the program over to James Croft. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. That was terrible. You are all clearly out of practice. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't done many public engagements recently. In fact, I was so delighted when Molly asked me to come here and come here in person, because I haven't been on a plane for almost 2 years. I haven't been out of St. Louis hardly for the last 2 years. I've basically not been out of my house. So I'm very, very grateful to be here. And it is, Harlan didn't tell me to say this, but it is really impressive to see so many of you here. I lead a humanist community. I actually, since that bio was written, I've become the senior leader of the Ethical Society in St. Louis, which is a community like this one. And I know how difficult it has been to keep communities like this together and meeting over this unprecedented time. So to see so many of you here today and all the people who are joining us on YouTube, hello YouTube folks, is really heartwarming to me. So thank you so much for having me. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. I want to take you on a journey not just across space, but also across time. We're in Egypt on the west bank of the Nile Delta 4,500 years ago. In the middle distance is a man. He wears a kilt of linen, white against his brown skin, and under his arm he carries a roll of papyrus. The man's name is Imhotep, and he is the high priest of the sun god Ra. He believes that Ra is the creator of all things, that we are all born from his tears, and he is here to honor his god with sacred rites. Like us, Imhotep would have spent much of his time under the sun. He and the civilization he served would have relied on the sun as a source of warmth and of the energy which allows plants to grow and therefore sustains life. Ra was worshipped in solar temples and through the placement of obelisks and pyramids around ancient Egypt, all across that ancient civilization, on papyri, in statues and reliefs, you find Ra, the great disk representing the sun over his head. And Imhotep is here at a solar temple to honor him. We do not know exactly what this solar temple looked like. A great veil of thousands of years shrouds our view. Archaeologists have only so far discovered 2 such temples, both essentially destroyed. But we do believe that the temples to Ra were not enclosed, but open appropriately to the sun and crowned with an obelisk. When it comes to the high priest's rites, again, we're at a loss. We know not what Imhotep would have said at such a temple, what words he would have spoken, or what offerings he might have made. But we can guess that as the sun goes down, his rites complete, Imhotep looks to the sky and sees stars. Not the few scattered pinpricks of light that we can make out in the skies over this city, but a great carpet of light, a glittering ocean of solar energy, a firmament like this. This photograph from artist and filmmaker Sriram Murali was taken from one of the few remaining places on Earth which still suffers from very little light pollution. It's the Eureka Dunes in Death Valley. And it helps us understand, I think, how grand and magnificent a presence the night sky would have been for our ancestors. The sun filling the world with light and the star-jeweled darkness of night, 2 primal realities we human beings have always lived with. And while we know so little of the rites to be performed at those solar temples, we do know that the ancient Egyptians understood the world as a constant battle between light and darkness, between order and chaos. And while light was represented by Ra, darkness was represented by Apep, enemy of Ra, the lord of chaos. Now this is Apep, represented as a huge snake, and every day he tried to prevent Ra from crossing the sky in his boat. And you can see them battling here. Apep on the boat, Apep under the boat, trying to prevent the sun from rising and getting across the sky. Because the sun was so important to them, anything which tried to stop it was seen as extremely evil. And the Egyptians hated Apep. They hated Apep so much that they had a whole book about how to defeat him. It is called the Book of Overthrowing Apep. They liked very direct titles, I guess, to their books. And it's kind of like a spell book for overcoming evil, with 6 chapters. Chapter 1, chapter of spitting upon Apep. 2, chapter of defiling Apep with the left foot. 3, chapter of taking a lance to smite Apep. 4, chapter of fettering Apep. 5, chapter of taking a knife to smite Apep. And 6, chapter of putting fire upon Apep. The ancient Egyptians really didn't like Apep. The sun was the center of their religion, a totem of their entire culture. In the Middle Kingdom period, pharaohs styled themselves as sun kings, living embodiments of the sun god. And the sun was vital to many of their religious, social, and agricultural practices. So anything which, like Apep, threatened the sun was dangerous to their whole regime. So imagine then how strange and disturbing for priests like Imhotep it must have been to look up one day into the sky and see this. Now, this is not normal. That's not how the sun is supposed to look, how Ra is supposed to look. The sun made a crescent in the sky like the moon, slowly vanishing. Stars beginning to appear even though it is not night. No surprise, then, that the ancient Egyptians believed that during a total eclipse of the sun, Apep had defeated Ra, devouring his barge whole, eating the sun. Now, obviously, Ra had help, and the other gods eventually hack open Apep and let him escape, and the sun returns. But for the few minutes of total eclipse, the ancient Egyptians must have been profoundly afraid. Many cultures have similar myths, similar ways of understanding these strange events. In Laos, the Laotian people explain lunar eclipses as the story of, this is my favorite one, a giant frog which tries to eat the moon. That's how they explain a lunar eclipse. And to scare the frog away, people make as much noise as possible, including firing guns at the moon, which doesn't sound very wise, actually. I worry about the people around who might be hit by the falling bullets, but they think they need to scare away the frog, so they fire their guns at the moon. In 1983, an Indonesian newspaper carried this cartoon, which shows a dragon burning his mouth on the corona of the sun and spitting it out, showing that they had a similar myth about a monster eating the sun during an eclipse. The people of ancient China also believed that during a solar eclipse, a dragon was trying to eat the sun. The Mayans, like the ancient Egyptians, blamed a giant serpent while an indigenous group in southern Siberia thought a giant bear had chomped down the sun. Not all cultures, though, thought the sun had been eaten during an eclipse. The Vikings believed that the sun was stolen by a wolf named Skoll. In Australia, Aboriginal groups observed the sky closely for both cultural and practical reasons. It was essential for navigation, for instance, and they certainly noticed eclipses, and they believed, like most world cultures, that they were bad omens, signs of evil magic, or terrible things to come, and required a response. And researchers in the Journal of Astronomical History report that in some communities, medicine people would throw magic stones at the eclipse to save the sun from darkness. They always succeeded. It was astonishing, and therefore that elevated the status of the medicine person in their community. While in other Aboriginal communities, people threw boomerangs in all 4 cardinal directions as a way to magic the sun back into existence. In fact, some of the oldest religious records that we have, some of the oldest historical records of any kind still in existence, are related to eclipses. We know, for instance, that astronomers in ancient China were recording solar eclipses at least 3,000 years ago, and that they were able to predict them at least to some degree of accuracy, and they took on great symbolic significance. Researchers at the Chinese Academy of Sciences describe how the total solar eclipse was seen as a warning to the emperor, because like Ra, the emperor was associated with the sun, and during an eclipse, the emperor would attempt to appease the gods by eating only vegetarian food, and the people would have to perform special rituals to bring the world back into order. And just like those ancient Egyptian rites, we don't know a whole lot about the very early Chinese studies of eclipses and their associated religious significance. And that's partly because those rites come from thousands of years before they started using paper. So much of the information that we do have about those early Chinese religious rituals comes from bones. Yeah, it's true. It's bones, which were used then as a form of divination, a fortune-telling style called pyromancy, which is probably the coolest name for any fortune-telling style ever. And they would come up with a question about the future, like how full will the harvest be next year? And then they would carve the question into the bone, which is what you can see here. And then they'd heat the bone up until it cracked open. And then they'd read the cracks, trying to find secret meaning in the precise patterns of the cracks on the piece of bone. Sort of like the most goth version of tea leaf reading you could ever imagine. And because eclipses were seen as bad omens and were thought to require effort to appease the gods and their ancestors, they were often referred to in these questions that were carved on bones. And so these fortune-telling bones are some of the earliest written records of religious rituals in all of human history. In fact, this fragment here of just such a bone records a lunar eclipse that happened in the night of 26 December 1192 BCE, so more than 3,200 years ago. And the collection these bones came from are the oldest documents in the Cambridge University Library. And I was a student at Cambridge. I spent a fair amount of time in that library, and it has some very, very old documents. So if these are the oldest of them, then wow. Why do I begin my presentation today by talking about eclipses? Because the human species' fascination with the sun and the countless ways that cultures all around the world have religified our relationship to it demonstrates three important things about religion. First, religion is ancient. Second, it is diverse. And third, it is deeply human. And I'm going to talk about all those three things. First, it's ancient. We've already seen that some of the very oldest written texts that we are able to translate are about religion. The oldest surviving literary works are both religious. The Kesh Temple Hymn and the Instructions of Shurapak, which are Sumerian collections of myths and legends from around 4,600 years ago. But the history of religion likely stretches back much further than the history of writing. Indeed, some of the most enigmatic finds of human prehistory potentially have religious connotations. Sites like Göbekli Tepe, a collection of what are probably temples, suggest that some form of religion is at least 10,000 years old. So far, we've unearthed 5 stone circles at Göbekli Tepe. You can see one of them there, and they are decorated with animal carvings. There is no evidence we can find of human habitation there. People didn't live there, nor the extent of human remains that would be expected if it was a burial site. We only find the bones of animals. So the speculation is that it had a ritualistic or religious function. So that gets us at least 10,000 years ago. Similarly, Çatalhöyük, a settlement in what is now Turkey, was built around 7500 BCE, so again, almost 10,000 years ago. And it includes numerous carvings of female figures thought by some to be representative of a very early deity. Potential signs of early religious sentiment can also be found in the evidence that our ancestors conducted rituals to respond to death. The remains of Mungo woman, pieces of a human skeleton found in Lake Mungo, Australia, are perhaps almost 25,000 years old and suggests that our ancestors could have performed complex burial rites, including cremation and the ceremonial marking of bodies, deep into prehistory. So how deep does religion go? How far back can we trace some sort of religious behavior in human history? Well, these are the structures at Bruniquel Cave in southwestern France. And these have been dated to, does anyone know how old they think these are? What do you think? How old do they look to you? I bet someone on YouTube is frantically typing the answer because they looked it up on Google. These have been dated to 176,000 years old. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. It kind of looks like a pile of turds. Or even Stone Age dildos, perhaps. But, in fact, what we're looking at are aligned stalagmites in rings, around 400 in all, which archaeologists believe were built by our evolutionary cousins, the Neanderthals. Given that the structures were clearly built by people, they think there is no way that this can be a natural formation. And given researchers can't come up with any practical use they may have had, then they might be some of the earliest evidence of human, or at least near-human, ritual activity still in existence. Like the dark grottos of Bruniquel Cave, our knowledge of the true origins of religion is murky. we don't truly know what the people who created these, or the people who cremated Mungo Woman, or the people who built Çatalhöyük were thinking when they did those things. It's tempting to assign religious or even simply symbolic significance to their actions. Perhaps the people at Lake Mungo were ushering Mungo Lady into the afterlife, or perhaps the Neanderthals at Brunekal Cave were building their own stalagmite henge. But honestly, we can't say. We just don't know. And we must be wary of our predilection to impose modern concepts onto ancient peoples, assuming a religious intent where there might not have been one. But the existence of truly ancient evidence of even potential spiritual or religious activity, plus the existence of numerous ancient sites known to have religious significance, which share some characteristic features with these older sites, offers the tantalizing possibility that religion is one of the oldest features of human culture. So religion is ancient. All through human history, as far as we can tell, and definitely before, religion in some form was a part of human life. It's also very diverse. We've already seen in the wild variety of different myths related to the sun and to eclipses that people from across the world have used religious symbolism in incredibly creative ways. A single natural event, like the total eclipse of the sun, has been interpreted as being eaten by wolves, stolen by dragons, even consumed by a frog. Our religious imagination is incredibly creative, and the multitude of living religions, religions still practiced by some people today, is a testament to that. There are literally thousands of faiths practiced by people in the world today, each with their own beliefs, practices, and religious culture. Everywhere you go on planet Earth, where there are people, religion is practiced. And everywhere it is different. Religion is incredibly ancient, and it is wildly diverse. Finally, religion is human. Now, that might sound like a profoundly obvious statement. Religion is something that humans do, so obviously it's human. But I mean something frankly more humanistic than that. Religion is, by all indications, a human-created phenomenon designed to respond to human needs. And sometimes we miss this, even those of us who are non-religious or may have been non-religious all our lives, because we're born into a world in which there are many well-established religions supported by big institutions, which are in some cases millennia old, and many of those religions claim divine inspiration or to be following a path laid down for them by divinely inspired people. Many of the doctrines of the world's great religions purport to be about non-human powers and entities, things like gods and angels and demons, which by definition transcend humanity. So that sometimes leads, I think, even the most secular-minded of us to put religion into a different mental box than other long-lived cultural activities like sports or culinary culture. But actually, viewed with a clear mind, we can see that we human beings created all these religions. And this becomes absolutely undeniable when we look at the concerns religion has traditionally explored across time. Just thinking about the sorts of things we've seen already in our little journey through time and space, through the history of religion, I think it becomes clear that religion has always been concerned with profoundly human affairs, with light and darkness, literally, the sun and the stars, community and isolation, good and evil, life and death. Those things might, in the religious mindset, take on a tinge of the supernatural, but they are actually profoundly mundane things. I mentioned earlier the instructions of Shurapak that ancient Sumerian religious text, and just take a look at some of the instructions it gives to people. You should not locate a field on a road. That's one of their religious instructions. It seems reasonable to me, right? You should not make a well in your field. People will cause damage on it for you. Fair enough? A loving heart maintains a family. A hateful heart destroys a family. That seems like good and down-to-earth advice. You should not play around with a married young woman. The slander could be serious. And my favorite, do not pass judgment when you drink beer. Now, as well as being pretty amusing, aren't these all very commonplace human concerns? Where to place a field, how to nourish a family, how to avoid social disgrace, how not to be a dick when you're wasted. These are very human concerns. And religion, for all its pretensions to superhuman authority, has always focused, in the last instance, on human concerns. Christianity's focus on sin and moral redemption. Islam's focus on service for your community. Buddhism's focus on responding to suffering. The focus in Judaism on covenant, law, and human dignity. These are the concerns of human beings, given existential and theological significance by us, an elevation of our own values to the status of the divine. Religion is, in other words, nothing particularly special. It's one of the many cultural products of the human organism, like music and politics, the creation of an evolved animal trying to fulfill its ethical, existential, spiritual, and social needs. As the band Jethro Tull put it in the liner notes to their album Aqualung, in the beginning man created God. In the image of man created he him. And man gave unto God a multitude of names, that he might be Lord over all the earth when it was suited to man. We made religion, and religion changes its form, functions, and concerns as human culture changes. Religion exists to satisfy some of our deepest and most profound desires. And so it does have common elements across time and space. The human desire to feel like we matter, like we have a purpose, to know right from wrong, to feel connected to each other, to be part of something bigger than ourselves. All these needs are common to the human species wherever and whenever we live. And so religion always tries to fulfill those needs. But the context in which we experience those needs is always changing. So religion has to change with it. In other words, we might say religion must evolve. And evolve it does. Now, I want to make clear what I mean and don't mean by that. There used to be a theory that said that all the religions on the earth evolved from one sort of religion, that they sort of literally branched off from one single set of ideas. And sometimes we hear an echo of that when people talk sometimes about how all world religions have the same fundamental principles at the heart of them, or are reflections of the same truth, or sometimes people will say, oh, they're all about the same God. You know, they're fundamentally the same and they came from the same place. I don't think that's right, actually. Clearly, there are some religions which grew from others, and you can sort of trace an ancestral tree of different forms of Christianity, for instance. Mormonism definitely did come from earlier forms of Christianity. But historians of religion now agree that many world religions have their own local, independent origins. And I don't see any reason to think that they're all ultimately related to some primal religious concepts and sort of grew out from there. I don't think there's a common ancestor of all religious faiths. Nor am I endorsing any particular view about the evolutionary origins of religion. There are lots of really interesting evolutionary, psychological, cognitive scientific, neuroscientific, sociological explanations about why human beings are pretty much universally religious creatures. You can read them in journals and books if you're interested in that. Darwin himself had a theory. He thought that religion evolved as a sort of adaptive survival strategy to bind groups together. I'm not endorsing in this talk any of those particular theories. All I mean when I say that religion has evolved and continues to evolve is that religion is a human-created cultural product which connects deep human needs to the environment in which people are living at a particular time. So it's not unchanging, while certain elements of it remain constant, others shift. New religions are constantly created, old ones die. Doctrines, modes of worship, and religious ideas morph in an attempt to appeal to contemporary people while maintaining some sort of link to the past. Are there any Zelda fans in the audience? No one plays video games here, so my joke about link to the past is just not going to work. Well, someone on YouTube will really appreciate that joke. I know it. The truth is that religion has been evolving, changing to meet different needs all throughout human history. Sumit Paul Chowdhury, in a feature called Tomorrow's Gods, written for the BBC, lays out clearly how religion continues to develop and change, just as we develop and change. He wrote, "We take it for granted that religions are born, grow, and die, but sometimes we are oddly blind to that reality. When someone tries to start a new religion, it's often dismissed as a cult. When we recognize a faith, we treat its teachings and traditions as timeless and sacrosanct. And when a religion dies, it becomes a myth, and its claim to sacred truth expires. Tales of the Egyptian, Greek, and Norse pantheons are now considered legends, not holy writ. Even today's dominant religions have constantly evolved throughout history." So the question we should probably ask ourselves, the question which I hope we will discuss together when I'm finished, is how will religion continue to evolve in the future? Where is religion going? And where would we like it to go? We live in a culture now, in the United States at least, common to much of the wealthy West, which is rapidly secularizing. People are remarkably quickly leaving their religion behind, causing a demographic shift which is striking in its speed and unidirectionality. I wrote unidirectionality. Is that a word? I'm not sure that's a word, but you all know what I mean. It's all going in one direction. As you can see from this chart, it's not that easy to see. I'll tell you what it says. From the Pew Research Center, which aggregates a number of different surveys, the ranks of the religiously unaffiliated, the nones, have swelled from around 16% in 2007 to around 26% in 2018-19 when that survey ended. A change of 10% in just over 10 years. That is massive. It may not sound like a lot, but in demographic terms, it is massive and very, very fast. And it's already profoundly changing the cultural and political landscape of this country. This country, as I'm sure you all understand, but I was surprised to find out, is very unusual in the extent to which religion, and specifically conservative Christianity, shapes culture and politics. I come from the UK. You can probably tell. Something about my sartorial elegance and vampiric complexion probably was a giveaway. And there, religion plays remarkably little role in public life. Politicians do not say, "God bless the Queen," "God bless Britannia," after their political speeches. There's essentially no religious right to speak of, no self-conscious voting bloc seeking to enforce religious principles onto others using the law. We don't have all those ghastly pastors that you have here who are always popping up on Facebook to say outrageous things about women or about LGBTQIA plus people, about abortion. Religion just doesn't play the same role back home as it does here. So when I moved to America, almost 15 years ago now, I got a rude awakening. I came here to do a master's degree at Harvard, and I remember sitting one day at the cafeteria in my graduate student dorm building, chatting with other students who lived there. We'd recently all arrived in the dorm together, most of us from overseas or other parts of the USA. And somehow the topic got onto religion. I still don't know why. And I rather naively simply offered the fact that I am an atheist and a humanist. And one guy, one fellow Harvard graduate student, US born, literally laughed in my face. He told me he had never met an atheist and that he could not understand how anyone could possibly disbelieve in God. And I was completely stunned. But since then, since becoming a humanist activist and traveling around much of the country to speak to groups like this one, and certainly since becoming a leader of a humanist congregation, you should see the mail that I get sometimes, I have seen how deeply misunderstood and distrusted non-religious people are in much of America. And I've heard truly depressing, sometimes even harrowing stories from people about the prejudice they've experienced just because they are non-religious. And that's to say nothing of the way that non-religious people are effectively shut out of the political process entirely, with basically no major political figures willing to openly express their lack of religious faith. And so the demographic shifts that I was just talking about, the rapid movement away from religion, particularly among young people, will undoubtedly change America profoundly. A United States in which young people make up the biggest demographic bloc, which they do now, and are more than a third non-religious, which they are now, is a completely different country, religiously speaking, than the one which previous generations inhabited. And we can see it, I think, changing right in front of us. If you remember some of the rhetoric around religion in the Democratic primary just before the last election, we can see some of the changes. I know that some of you will remember that Bernie Sanders was twice a frontrunner to become the party's candidate for president, and he is not someone who openly mobilizes his religious faith to galvanize his supporters. He was even featured on a humanist meme. So I know everyone wants to applaud when they see Bernie. These humanist groups, when I do these in Catholic churches, they don't applaud so much. But in the humanist groups, they're like, "Oh, Bernie, yeah, nice to see him." So the role of religion in US culture is changing right now as religious affiliation declines. And yet, at the very same time, the Republican Party, for its part, seems to be fusing ever closer with a virulently conservative form of Christianity, using its power and influence to try and force their beliefs on other people. I don't know if it's the same here as it is in Missouri, where I now live, but in Missouri, there are so many bills in the legislature all about forcing Christianity on everybody, squeezing the Bible into public schools, prayer at all the public meetings, in God we trust, on the courthouses, on the cop cars, in schools. Tattooed on our butt cheeks will be the next thing that they want. Sometimes it feels like we have two Americas, two totally divergent religious culture in America. One rapidly secularizing, a youth culture which is leaving traditional religion behind, and an angrier, more frightened conservative Christian culture, which is doing everything it can to hold on, to stop the evolution of religion. But you can't stop evolution. So what is the future of religion in America? I'm literally asking. I don't know. I mean, what do you expect, a prophecy? I'm a humanist. We don't do prophecies, okay? There are some trends, though, that I want to leave you with. Some trends that I think I see developing. Further evolutions of religion as it changes to meet the new needs of the present. First, I think we can see that many of the traditional religious faiths are feeling increasingly outdated and ill-suited to meet the demands of our historical moment. Young people are increasingly turning away from traditional religion, particularly in response to its more politicized manifestations. We, meaning millennials and Gen Z, which comes after us. And yes, I'm just about a millennial, despite the hairline. I just sneaked in under the bar there. In general, we don't want to talk about the evils of abortion, or what's wrong with homosexuality, or the necessary and complementary role of women and men in relationships, or any of the inhumane, outdated, stuffy nonsense which traditional religions have been feeding us for so long. We are also increasingly distrustful of religious institutions. We've grown up being confronted with the child abuse scandal in the Catholic Church and its continuing efforts to cover it up. Many of you will have read about what happened in France recently. It's just horrific, the figures there. Countless mega-church pastors making millions and millions of dollars while refusing to help the most needy. Who can remember Joel Osteen refusing to let people use his churches after the bad weather that they had? And church hierarchies, again and again, failing to stand with the most marginalized people in society. And my generation are not here for that. If that's what it means to be religious, if that's what religion is all about, corruption and greed and small-mindedness and prejudice, then we don't want to be religious, right? But that doesn't mean that the fundamental human needs religion developed to fulfill have disappeared. Just because more and more of us are leaving religion behind doesn't mean that the good things religious institutions can provide are no longer needed. We all want to feel that our life matters. We all want a sense of purpose. We want to be part of a community, to build relationships with others, to know that we belong. We want to find a sense of solidarity, a feeling of hope for the future. I desperately need that right now. Seems pretty grim right now, doesn't it? We need a set of ideals to strive for, to live for. We want to be the best versions of ourselves and help bring out the best in other people. We seek truth and connection and significance and goodness. We want what religion has always promised and too even frequently, if ever, has provided. And today, our religious needs outstrip our religious resources. Now, I think the secular world can provide for many of those needs. I'm not down on secular institutions. I think they're great. I think some of the traditional functions of religion can successfully be secularized and created in entirely different ways. And all the evidence suggests that people are turning to secular sources for those many needs traditionally met by religion. A friend of mine, Casper ter Kuile, he just published a book called The Power of Ritual. It's a great book. And he's one of the hosts of the podcast Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. Some of you may have listened to it. He wrote a report called How We Gather, which is about how young people are finding community and spirituality today. And he suggests that things like CrossFit and Soul Cycle is an interesting name, isn't it, for a secular institution, are stepping into the void that disaffiliation with religious institutions leaves behind. And to an extent, I agree with him. Religious congregations are not today, and have actually never been, the only places where people can find a sense of meaning, to come together in community, to be reminded that we matter. Some of us find those things in music or art, or they find community in some sort of service group that they're part of. So one thing which will happen is that people will increasingly find fulfillment of their religious needs outside religions. And that's great. But if I'm honest, if I'm entirely honest, I think that quite often my religious, my existential, spiritual needs as a humanist are simply not met. They are simply not met by existing secular society. And I think that if we're honest with ourselves, many non-religious people are in the same boat, at least many people who come to join my congregation. I don't think our existing secular institutions are quite up to the task, at least not yet, of replacing what people leave behind when they leave religion. And so the question I'm left with is, how can we meet the needs traditionally met by religion without recreating the worst part of the religions of the past? One way forward, one evolution of religion, which I believe is important, which I pursue myself in my own life, is an increasing decoupling of religious structures and practices from religious beliefs. Increasingly, I believe people will create communal institutions which do the good things religions do, just without the religion. This is the Ethical Society of St. Louis. I took that photo. I'm very proud of it. It's probably not the best photo, but it's the best photo I took. It is the congregation where I work. We are a godless congregation, a place for people to meet, to figure out how to get through life, to find connection, to try to be better than we used to be, without any religious creed or dogma. A place to be human together. We've been around for more than 100 years, 140 we're approaching, so we were a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of the religious changes we're seeing now. But now we're seeing the development of lots of other communities which are trying to do the same thing. Innovations like Sunday Assembly, and a group of communities called the Oasis Network, which are basically humanist congregations as well, are trying to develop alternatives to traditional religions which fulfill the same needs. And in a way, I think humanist groups like yours are doing the same thing. They're building a community of humanists, not just to hear a talk, but to do service together and to see each other through life, who strive to improve the human condition through reason and compassion, not by adherence to a traditional religious faith. So you're doing this work already. And I believe we need to build more groups like this, because we can stop being religious, but we can't stop being human. And we need to get our spiritual, existential needs met somehow. Perhaps you feel like this is a bit of an odd perspective to hear from an atheist and a humanist. Perhaps you would prefer that it would be better to just let secularization continue and let religion die out and it'll be gone. And that certainly has been the view of many atheists and humanists throughout history. Imagine no religion. And it's certainly true that religion is responsible for a huge amount of human misery and suffering throughout history and today. Yet for the same reasons I've outlined regarding the age, diversity, and fundamental humanness of religion, I think it's just unlikely ever to die out. If religion is a cultural response to real human needs, and if those needs persist, whether a culture or a person is traditionally religious or not, then we will need something to fulfill those needs as society becomes more secular, some way to bring us together into communities we can belong to, some way to help us live out our highest values and become who we want to be, some way to enable us to grapple with the biggest questions of life. Why are we here? Where did we come from? How should we treat each other? Where do we go when we die? Whatever religion evolves into as these major demographic shifts occur, I think it's critical that we humanists remember one thing. The future is in our hands, even the future of religion. For the vast majority of our species' history, religion has been sort of a given, something that we were born into, perhaps something that we wrestle with a bit, but not something that we consciously create. It evolved, but it was not intelligently designed. You see what I did there? I think it's time to flip the script. Whatever religion or irreligion will look like in the future, we have to take control of it and make it what we want. Emerson once wrote, "There will be a new church founded on moral science. At first cold and naked, a babe in a manger again, the algebra and mathematics of ethical law, the church of those to come, without shawls or psaltery or sackbut, but it will have heaven and earth for its beams and rafters, science for symbol and illustration. It will fast enough gather beauty, music, picture, poetry." I'm moved by that image of a church for those to come, and I think it's our task to build it. Thank you very much. What happens now, Harlan? No one told me what happens now. Do I stay here? Okay. Okay. Cool. Sorry.
Test.
Well, when we develop a time machine, Harlan, you're my first stop.
Okay, we're going to have Q&A now, and because I've always sat in the back of the room when I went to school, so that's why I have a affinity for people who sit in the back of the room. That's where we're going to begin our questions.
Oh no! But all the
So-
naughty children sit at the back. They ask the difficult questions.
That's true. I know this lady, so I'll give her the mic.
Thank you for your talk. The question that came to my mind is that it seems to me that younger people are abandoning most organizations, not just religious organizations. So if you look at Rotary clubs, they're all gray and white hairs. If you look at the American Association of University Women, gray and white hairs. The League of Women Voters, gray and white hairs. So is this actually a religious problem, or do we have a problem of the younger generations being disaffected from social organization?
I think that's just a great question. I'm sorry, I can't see your name.
It's Glenna.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. It's a great question and an important one. Am I doing that? Oh, I was like, what am I doing? God is angry with us. So everyone stop immediately. So there is a sociologist called Robert Putnam who's explored for many decades. Now I'm genuinely scared. Who has explored for many, many decades the disaffiliation. That woke me up. He's explored for many, many decades the disaffiliation from all sorts of civic institutions of generations as they get younger and younger. His famous book about that is Bowling Alone, where he looked particularly at bowling leagues and how people shifted from bowling in leagues together with other people to going to bowl alone. And he used that as a kind of metaphor for the disaffiliation from all areas of civic life. And I think his most recent book still is a massive book called American Grace. And it is a demographic and sociological analysis of the state of American religion in the 2000s. And it is a fascinating book which explores exactly the question in part that you asked. Is this a thing happening to all civic institutions, or is it peculiar to religion? And the answer is both. Yes, younger people are not as engaged in any sort of civic institution as older people are. And there's been a dramatic generational shift in terms of engagement in things like political parties and, unions and Rotary clubs, as you said, and fraternal organizations and all that sort of stuff. And religion is particularly declining, even more than those other institutions. There's a particular disaffiliation from religion. So it is a yes and situation. It's both, and religion is doing particularly badly. One of the super interesting things that they found, though, is that in their mind, according to the big studies, they did these massive studies, thousands of people, longitudinal, so they followed up with the same people over a number of years, which made them able to track how their participation in different areas of life changed over time. And they believe that being a member of a religious congregation, regardless of the religion, and in fact, regardless of the individual religious beliefs of the person, was a major causal driver of civic participation in general. People who are members of a congregation are much more likely to also be members of a political party, or indeed to vote, to give money, to be involved in community at large. And they hypothesize that it is being a member of a values-based community that's constantly reminding you about how you should act and connecting you to opportunities to act that way, like the service projects that you do here, is a causal factor leading people into greater civic engagement. They even hypothesize, there's a great paragraph in there that I can't exactly remember, but it says something like, they basically hypothesize that an atheist who was a member of a religious congregation for whatever reason would get more involved in civil society simply through their membership. And so they say maybe it would be a good idea to build non-religious congregations simply for the purpose of driving civic engagement. But they said, sadly, there are too few of them in existence for us to test the hypothesis. So it's a very provocative book, and there's a lot to be said about the connection between more general civic engagement and engagement in religious institutions. Now, I warn you, I answer questions at incredible length. I try and hold myself in, but if you have a burning question, you better ask it quick, because I've got a flight going back the other way this evening. Okay. And I'll repeat it for the people at home. So I think the question is essentially, broadly speaking, what is the cause of the disaffiliation in civic institutions? And is it perhaps particularly women's greater engagement in the workforce in the last few decades? So, right. And particularly because women have historically in the United States been significantly more likely to be heavily involved in a congregation than men, which is another interesting sociological finding. So Putnam and Campbell's research, they wrote this book, American Grace, is very interesting in trying to figure out why this decline in civic participation happened in the United States. And they put forward a lot of different hypotheses. One of the challenges about sociological research is that you cannot do experimental studies because you can't run the clock back and change certain conditions at whim and then see what happens over decades. So you're always kind of positing ideas after the fact. So it's a difficult area of study. But this is just one of my favorite sections in the whole book. It's a genius piece of sociological research that they cite. There was a town back when television was just starting to be more widespread and available in individual people's homes, which because of its geographical location was able to receive a television signal much, much later than other surrounding towns with very similar demographic characteristics. And so it made for a very neat natural experiment, and sociologists happened to notice it quick enough to be able to measure what happened to civic participation in the surrounding towns as television spread through them, and in the town that couldn't get television, and then in that town as well as it got television in people's individual homes. And it decimated civic engagement of all kinds. And I know it sounds like a very Luddite thing. Oh, it's television, everyone's in front of their television. But when I read the research, it's amazing how the precipitous decline in civic engagement matches extremely well to the widespread availability of this new form of entertainment that people didn't have to leave their homes for. And that they could literally see it happening as the different places got the television. People stopped going to their fraternal organizations, their bowling leagues, their churches. And so there may be many, many factors, but that's just one of them that sticks in my mind. And I don't know, what does that mean now that we all have a television in our pocket? I think I agree with the great Harvard academic, Stephen Jay Gould. So yeah, I think that that's right, that there's no, what us philosophers would call teleology behind evolution. There's nothing that it's driving toward. It doesn't have a purpose in mind, right? It doesn't have a mind. It's just happening. And what happens is the organisms get progressively more fit for particular evolutionary niches, or they die out, right? But there's no, it's not aiming somewhere. And that's actually something I think quite important for humanists in particular to remember, because some forms of humanism, I'm teaching a course right now about the history of humanism in part for the American Humanist Association, and there have been forms of humanism that sort of portray human beings as the pinnacle or end point of evolution, right? We are the point, right? All that stuff happened in the past to get to us, and we, the rational animal, is the end point of it. I love that everyone's laughing at that. So that's good. It's only in the last few years that people would laugh at the idea that human beings are a rational animal. But I think we've all perhaps been surprised by the depth of irrationality that human beings have displayed over like the last 5 or 10 years. So that's not true, right? We're just an animal like all the other ones. And we weren't planned to be here. If things happen differently, slightly along the evolutionary pathway, maybe there would be no Homo sapiens sapiens at all. And there would be a different species instead. So I think that's right. I don't think evolution has a purpose. That's why I think what we should do with religion is intelligently design it. We should ask, what do we want out of it? And what do we want to keep and what do we want to get rid of? Okay, so the question for our YouTube friends is, it was suggested that many of the functions of religions I spoke about were individual, in the sense of individuals finding community, individuals finding purpose, etc. But is there a societal role for religion and maybe for humanism as well? For humanism, yeah, so what sort of society should humanists strive for? Thank you for reminding me. So firstly, I think that I don't necessarily think of the desire for community, for instance, and of ethics as individual pursuits. I think of those as inherently societal in the sense that a society is a big community and ethics is something we do with other people. There's, at least in my concept of ethics, there's no such thing as a non-relational ethics. If there's only one person in the whole world, I don't think there would be ethics. I think that it's only in relationship that ethics even exists. So I kind of think of those as communal, but that may be partly because the strand or flavor of humanism that I represent at the Ethical Society is a very communitarian one. We really do think of everything in terms of building a better community in a society. So yes, I think that humanists have historically and do today have a profound vision for a different society. I mean, just imagine we're all living through this unprecedented pandemic, right? And we've all seen how one particular government that was in control, right, could have made lots of decisions, decided to respond to that. Now imagine if that had been a bunch of humanists making the decision. Not to be like too self-congratulatory about it, but just imagine that it was you folks in this room, that we just got together, and the people watching on YouTube at home. We all got together. You probably have to put some clothes on if you're watching at home, if you're going to come in the same room as us, but still. So we all get together and we all decide the COVID response, right? Using our humanist values. I feel like we would have done a better job. I just feel like we would have done a much better job. And that is a vision of a better society. You know, even to put it very simply, how about a society that takes science seriously and doesn't try and discredit science in the free press? That's a very humanistic idea. How about one that cares about other people enough to say that some tiny infringement on your personal liberty is acceptable if it has massive consequences for everybody else? Humanism has always actually had a societal vision. I was reading, as I was coming here, I'm teaching next week a class about Indian humanism and atheism, meaning the country of India. And they have this very profound sense of the sort of society that an atheist or humanist society would be like. And it's all based on the idea, essentially, that religion is inherently sectarian. It splits people into different groups based on their beliefs. Atheism is universal in the sense that once you get rid of the idea that there's one God or another God, the fact that there's no God is the same for everyone. So it focuses our attention on our common humanity. And so that means we have a different sort of responsibility to each other than many sectarian religions understand. And that leads to us working towards a different sort of society. And you actually see this in different social organizations like yours, which try and do things to change society towards humanistic ideals. So when you here are working for dignity in dying, for instance, for the right to choose how your last moments go, you are trying to change society. You are trying to tilt society towards a more humanistic vision in which people get to choose what happens to us, not someone else's ethical code or understanding gets to choose what happens to us. And I see humanists doing that all over the place in small ways, sometimes in big ways, like you've fought against the recent attempts to stop abortions. It sounds like you had a rally about that here, which some of you participated in. All that is a reflection of a humanist desire for a better society. And I'm really passionate about that because I can't tell you how many groups I used to go to when I first started talking to humanist groups more than, my gosh, it was like 12 years ago now. Oh, that was painful. And there weren't so many of them actually doing things in their community, you know? We would have a nice talk about philosophy and we'd all say, oh, God doesn't exist. Aren't we clever for working that out? And I always had the sense of actually that's the easiest part, you know? That's the beginning of your journey in life, to figure out we're all here together on this planet and no one's going to come to save us. Now what's the next step? And the next step is exactly creating that social vision and encouraging other people to live up to it. I'm preaching now. I'm on fire. Okay, let's keep going. More creative. Look how polite you are to each other. It's adorable. Yeah. Yes. So, great question. The question is, this is a humanist group, but it's not a congregation, and it's meeting in the building of a congregation. What should it do, in my mind, if I was king of the group? Like, what? I'll tell you what to do. Well, firstly, I think you have to recognize how much of an achievement it is to have a group that is so vibrant and successful as your existing group. Very few humanist groups I speak to would have been able to pull off this meeting in terms of the number of people in this room, the tens of thousands of people, John tells me, are watching on YouTube. Was that, what, it's millions? We're up to millions now? Excellent. Very happy. Good. And just technologically and organizationally, to be able to gather so many people here is a big achievement, and you're doing really great. So first, I think that it's excellent that you exist, and it sounds like you're doing amazing things. It is interesting, though, that this building was created by a congregation, right? And so you're able to be here and use the space because someone had a vision of a big community and brought people together and raised the money and thought, we need a building, we need to... I think it would be nice to think like that again, right? To think, well, we could do that. We could build a humanist center in every city in America with its own actual building. I don't see why that's impossible. It doesn't have to look like a church. I'm uncomfortable with some of the more churchy things my own congregation does, right? So I get that kind of feeling of like, this is not quite who we are. But having an idea that we're building something that's going to outlast us, that's going to be there when we are gone and people are still going to meet to uphold the same values, or hopefully updated, developed versions of the same values, and who are going to care about each other for a long time, decades and centuries maybe, and not just the next few weeks. I think that's really important. And I certainly feel that, you know, we're a 135, 140-year-old congregation in St. Louis. I felt it particularly during COVID, a real responsibility to keep it alive. I want it to be there long after I'm dead because it's played such an important role in the community. And thinking in that way makes you have a different relationship to it. And I think if there's one thing that I wish humanist groups did more, and I don't know if you do this or not, so I'm just saying in general, is get to know each other, like actually give a shit about each other. Because it's very nice to meet for a talk once a month, but if you're sick and no one calls, it really doesn't feel like you're part of a community. Or if you don't have anyone to turn to when you have a real struggle in your life, you have no one to talk to, you still feel alone, even if you come to a talk on the month. And that is the thing that I feel is a difference when I speak, for instance, at a UU church versus some of the humanist groups I speak at, where I get the sense you're not really together through life, you're together now for this meeting, and then you're not going to speak to each other until the next meeting. So I think it would be a good idea to try and interconnect your lives a little bit. I'm not saying you have to. Yeah.
who have left religion behind also, again, speak about want to leave institutions behind. And my feeling is, as a student of sociology and religion, is that you have to build an institution. And to be an all-volunteer organization all the time is probably not very self-sustaining.
Yeah.
And so it's about people giving resources. That's how a building like this is built, and all those people who believe in what they are about building buildings. I don't know, can they say something more about
Something about institutions and building. Yeah. I totally agree with you. People die, institutions live on. And I feel like humanists should understand that more than anybody, because we recognize that we have a limited time on this planet. And when we're done, we're done. And so what are we going to leave behind us? That becomes a very important question. And if you can contribute to the life of an institution, if you can build a new institution with the money and the policies and procedures to outlive you, then you can have a real impact. I spoke a little bit about how surprising I felt it is that the United States is so affected by a particular conservative brand of Christianity. There's reasons why they were able to do that, because they built it. You know, they built institutions. They built churches and a whole network of universities and research institutes, and they funded them with tons of money. And over decades, they held an influence in American politics massively, massively disconnected to their actual numbers. And honestly, I want some of that. You know, I would like to have a lobbying body as powerful as the religious right in DC, but for humanists. And that will only happen if we build institutions, if we get really serious and say, no, it really matters to me what the government is doing about climate change. You know, what are we doing about climate change? Seems to me that we could just destroy human civilization if we don't do anything. Seems like a kind of a big deal. Could there be anything more important than literally saving the planet? But what's happening? Like basically nothing, as far as I can tell. Like no one seems to care at a political level. Well, how do we make them care? The only way is to band together essentially in institutions and to build power over lots of decades, honestly, to make a series, a network of interconnected institutions that will be able to wield that sort of influence. And I think, this is just me speaking as an outsider to American humanism, humanism in the UK and in some parts of Europe is actually much more healthy and politically influential. And it's not just because religion is much less, although that's part of it, but it's also because there isn't the same allergy to institution building in many European humanistic areas than there is here. Because whenever I talk like this in humanist groups, people will be like, well, that sounds like a church. So I don't want to do that because I'm not religious. And what is really being said there is, I'm not willing to engage in a tried and tested and effective way of changing society and culture because religions do it too. It's like, well, you just given up at the start, right? You have to fight using the techniques that you have and that work, and you just use them for different purposes. That's what I think anyway. So that's been a bit of my mission, is to go around, and that's why I talk about and I show the picture of the building that we have, which is, I really should choose a different picture. It's very difficult to see in that image because it's so powerful to have this. I can't tell you how much of a difference we're able to make because we can host like talk back with your congressperson in our own building where we get to set the agenda and we decide what questions are asked and things like that. And because when coalitions are put together to advocate for more gun control in our state, they ask me to be part of the coalition because I represent an institution. I'm not just a single person. So then the humanist voice is there because I'm there. So I think institutions are very important. And you've got one, right? You actually do have one. It's just a question of how big do you want it to get and how much money are you going to give it? Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So maybe this is sort of with that, I guess, how do you prevent it from becoming inflexible? You know, like, yeah.
Yeah, how do you prevent it from becoming inflexible? Or if I could, like, how do you stop a community becoming a cult? Right? So that might be a question that we're worried about. I think it's a great question, and I worry about it a lot. I think one of the best ways to stop your community becoming inflexible, rigid, and dogmatic is to talk about the problem explicitly, like this, right? To raise frequently, how do you feel we're doing? Are we being too dogmatic? Are we being inflexible? Are we open to new ideas? I did that recently with our youth group. I occasionally speak to our youth group. We have a whole Sunday school with kids from nursery school all through 12th grade. And I went to speak to our youth group and I asked them, we have 11 values that the Sunday school is supposed to follow. And they include things like, I can learn from everyone. I am free to question. I'm free to choose what I believe, things like that. And I asked, how do you think we're doing on things? Do you think this is a dogmatic community? Are you allowed to speak their minds? And they're like, this is totally a dogmatic community. And I was like, oh, damn it, what do you mean? Okay, and they said, well, they basically said, they didn't say it in these words, but they basically said, you're all liberals, you're all Democrats and liberals, and we can't explore any other political ideas. We're not allowed to talk about libertarianism. We're not allowed to talk about this meme I found on the internet that was mean about Joe Biden. We can't express any different political ideas because all our parents are liberals and everyone here is a liberal, and it's just an assumption of political liberalism. And that was a really interesting conversation and a difficult one because political beliefs stem ultimately from our ethical values and from our idea about how we should treat each other and what society should be like. There's sort of codifications of deeper ethical values, and our whole community exists to promote a certain set of ethical values. So that does actually prescribe a range of political beliefs you can sort of have, because some political beliefs are not compatible with our ethical values. So it gets a bit difficult. But in conversation with them and in talking to other members of my community, I decided, no, we are kind of too restrictive in the ideas that we allow to be expressed. And not like we're not kicking people out for saying the wrong thing, but there was a culture, of just people knew that they weren't quite on the same page as everyone. And thinking about how to deal with that is difficult. One of the things we have is opening words. Every Sunday when we meet, one of our members can volunteer to give opening words, and they can say anything they want. We don't read what they're going to say. I don't know what they're going to say. So depending on who it is, I'm often sitting up on stage being like, oh no, this person is going to speak. I hope they don't talk about this subject. And what I'm trying to do is create a level of what Keats would call negative capability, the ability to sit with discomfort and be okay with it. And among my more activist members, one of my challenges is to be like, you might hear an idea you disagree with here, and you're going to be fine. We're not going to invite the alt-right to give a talk, right? But you might hear something that's a little outside, and that's okay. That's part of being in community with other people, and we're all going to learn from each other. But balancing that with certain fundamental commitments can be difficult. But the main tip is talk about it. Just literally have it as an explicit value. We are a non-dogmatic community. We're a community where you can speak your mind and be questioned, and then build it into the structures. So we also have question and answer after all our talks like this. No one gets up on the podium and then says something and then can't be questioned. Many times I go to the question and answers after I've given my talk, and it's kind of like a sermon, there's music before and after, and I get up to a podium on a stage and I give a talk, and then I go afterwards into a little room and people come in, and my members come in. One of them come in and said, something you said today really made me angry. And I say, good. Tell me about it. Tell me what made you angry, and we can talk about it. So you try and build in structures where you can have difficult conversations about disagreement, and you make explicit that you're a place where disagreement is allowed, and you remain vigilant all the time. It's not a cult yet, I promise. Otherwise, they would listen to me a lot more than they do. Sometimes I wish we were a cult. Okay, when do we stop, Harlan? I can literally go until my plane goes. Okay, so there's a couple over here. Are there questions online too? Can they submit questions in chat? Have they? Okay, yeah. I'm taking over, you see.
I'm fascinated. I know we want to talk about the future, but I'm fascinated about the historical perspective. And I've got two questions I think blend together. The very earliest, call it proto-religion activity, and game, right? I've seen dogs and dolphins play games, right? Could those early things be games? And
Oh.
what else? And have you ever seen any non-human activity that looks like early religion?
That's a really interesting question. The question is, okay, about the deep history of religion, sort of where I started my talk today. And is there a relationship potentially with games and playful behavior, which human beings and other animals also display? And also, have I ever seen any sort of proto-religious behavior among non-human animals? So firstly, I think we have to be humble about what we can know, because we're looking way back. If we're looking into our evolutionary past, we are thousands and thousands of years before written history or any sort of recorded history. So we are making a huge amount of interpretations from our current standpoint based on artifacts. So things like Göbekli Tepe, the kind of brown stalagmite circles, we don't know why those were built. We have no idea. But one of the things we do know is that representational behavior was one of the earliest and most distinctive behaviors of human beings, particularly, and some of our related groups like Neanderthals. Making something stand for something else symbolically, like painting a picture of an animal and have it mean animal, right? That's so basic to how we communicate, because every form of human communication basically is symbolic, almost every form, that it's very difficult to appreciate how very different it is from how we think any other animal communicates. We don't, I think, know of any animal that does that basic representational, this stands for that. Right? This is a picture of an animal, it's not a real animal. And that's very early, because you think of things like cave paintings and stuff like that. Did anyone see the documentary they made about the very early cave paintings where they think that it might have been painted in such a way as to move in the torchlight, so it would look like potentially a moving image? Very cool, very cool. So in terms of play, so we certainly see play as one of this is lucky that I'm a human developmentalist by training, play is one of the earliest forms of behavior that human beings do in our development. So very, very, very young children are capable of what we interpret to be play. And we think that we know that there's a lot of developmental benefits to play, right? It's very essential to let children play because it's a way that they develop a lot of their later capacities for complex thought and social behavior and things like that. And I could talk about play for ages. And one of the most studied phenomena in human development ever is play. And I know from playing with my own puppy, I don't know what my puppy is thinking, but they've certainly evolved ways to at least mimic behaviors of human play, because I was trying to get her in from the garden so I could get on my plane today, and she wanted to play a fun game, which is she is going to stand still until I get close to her, and then she is going to run away. And then she's going to stop still and wait for me to come close to her again, and then she's going to run around again. Ha ha ha, very funny. Oh, I've got to get on a plane. But I did catch her eventually. So other animals do seem to play, right? There are some, I've forgotten the word for apes and things, that category of animal. What's that called? Yeah, primates, hominids, yeah, those are that seem to play with each other, right? They seem to do these playful behaviors that don't have any survival benefit or anything like that, any direct survival benefit. Whether there's a relationship between that and early religious activity, I don't know, and I don't know anybody knows, but I'm sure that some evolutionary psychologist will have written a book about it. I bet. I just haven't read that book, so I'm sorry, I can't help. Do you want to do one more? Yes, I need to stop. Wine, beer, and soda. Jeez. Ask it early in the social hour, because once I get to the wine. Thank you.
Which is that I really enjoyed this Q&A, and I really loved the last 20 minutes of your presentation. But when I came here to a secular event, and you were giving sort of a history of religions, I was getting kind of like, I was fidgeting in my seat, like, why is this guy going through all these kind of old, superstitious, religious pieces of our ancient history? I don't want to hear this. I want to hear about what we as atheists or humanists can be doing now to engage. And I'm still, when you say congregation, it kind of freaks me out a little bit. And one of your questions is, how do we build a new religion? Or what do we do to create this new religion? And I guess I would say maybe I'm just hung up on words like religion, but that to me connotates some sort of superstitious
Yes.
belief, and so I'm struggling a little bit. Everything you said in this Q&A, I like. Why new religion at all? Maybe it's just that word. But can you help me just understand? Turn that corner a little bit.
Maybe, or maybe not. And it's okay to be where you are. I mean, firstly, thank you for the backhanded compliment. I appreciate it. I could tell that you were checking out a little bit after about half an hour. I was looking over there and I was thinking, Joel is not enjoying this. This is too religious for him. So in my defense, if you ask someone to give a talk about the evolution of religion, well, you are going to get a bit about that. No, not really. I don't feel the need to defend myself. It's a good question. I don't think it has to be called a religion. I actually don't think of what we do as religious at the Ethical Society of St. Louis. And I don't call myself a religious person. The reason why I put it in these terms sometimes for humanist audiences who want to hear this particular talk is because I want to provoke that question. And I kind of want to provoke the discomfort. And the reason why I want to provoke a little bit of discomfort is it's a tendency I have sometimes seen in humanist spaces that people kind of feel like they've arrived, They've got over the religious nonsense. They don't believe in that anymore. Now they just live their life and it's easy. And I kind of want to keep the questions live to say, actually, it's not so easy. These sorts of behaviors have been with our species since before we were a species. You think you can get over that in like the 25 years of life I'm sure you've had, Joel? Yeah, I know how to flatter my audience. Right, so I want to keep the questions live. I want to keep thinking about, well, what was it that the people of ancient Egypt thought was so important about their religion that they built their entire society around it? Do we have to believe in what they believed? No, I don't. But it would be nice to understand why it was so important to them, because evolutionarily speaking, they are us. They are the same animal. And so I guess I want to provoke some of that discomfort and to make you grapple with that question. Like, if it's not going to be religion, what are we going to build in a rapidly secularizing society to help people find a sense of meaning and purpose and connectedness? And I think that's particularly important, as this is the last question. I want to bring it right up to date. We are living in a culture that is really challenged right now. American culture is very sick. And I don't mean that as a disparaging thing to say. It's just if you look at what's happening in politics, that's a sign of a very sick culture. Large numbers of people have checked out of reality entirely. They do not live in the same world as we do, at least mentally. And those people are quite politically powerful. We saw that in the attack on the Capitol, and they are not going to stop. Part of the reason why people check out of reality is because they feel disconnected from it, because they don't have a sense of meaning and purpose and significance in their own life. And these conspiracy theories and these extremist political groups swoop in and they say, this is what the world is all about. We have the answers for you. This is who is to blame. This is how you fix it. We need to tell a better story than them. And right now, I'm not sure we've got one. So I want to provoke you to think about what story we could tell. You might not call it a religion, but it will have to have the pull and the luster of the myths of bygone eras to fight what we're up against right now. At least I think so. So that's why I talked a lot about religion. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone at home. I think I'm supposed to say to the people on YouTube, like and subscribe. Mash the like button. Oh, thank you. Of course, thank you very much. I had a real fun time. And now I get to drink wine.